For 50 years, the death of Dan Blocker has been Hollywood's heaviest silence. He was Haas, the heart of Bonanza, the gentle giant who America loved like a family member. Then, in 1972, he vanished. A routine surgery, a sudden collapse, dead at 36. Rumors of malpractice and cover-ups have swirled for decades. But now his son, Dirk Blocker, is finally opened the family archives. He reveals the private journals, the hidden exhaustion, and the heartbreaking truth about his father's final days. He confirms what we all suspected. The man who played the happiest cowboy on TV was actually a man running out of time. What really killed Dan Blocker? Here is the story the cameras never told. The shadow of the sun. To understand a confession, we must first look at the man who is making it. Dirk Blocker is now 66 years old. If you look at him today, perhaps you know him as the bumbling Detective Hitchcock on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. The resemblance is terrifying. He has the same broad face, the same kind eyes, the same heavy, deliberate walk. For his entire life, Dirk has lived in a shadow that stretches 6'4" and weighs 300 pounds. Every time he walks down a street, strangers stop him. They don't say hello. They say, "You look just like him." Or, "I miss him." They are talking about Dan. For decades, Dirk kept his father's legacy at arm's length. It was too painful. It was too heavy. He was only 14 years old when his father died. Imagine being a 14-year-old boy. Your father isn't just your dad. He is a national monument. He is on lunchboxes. He is on billboards. He is in the living room of every house in America every Sunday night. And then, one afternoon, he goes to the hospital for something simple, and he never comes back. The shock doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your reality. For years, Dirk Blocker stayed silent about the circumstances of that death. He let the tabloids speculate. He let the fans gossip. But recently, as he surpassed the age his father ever reached, Dirk began to look back. He opened the old boxes. He read the letters. He spoke to the surviving cast members. And he pieced together a portrait of a man that is far more complex and far more tragic than the character of Cartwright. He discovered that his father wasn't just a happy-go-lucky cowboy. He discovered a man who was carrying a weight so immense that it likely crushed him from the inside out long before he reached the operating table. To understand that weight, we have to wind the clock back to the very beginning. We have to go to the dust and heat of West Texas in the Great Depression. We have to go to the moment the giant arrived. The 14-pound miracle. December 10th, 1928, DeKalb, Texas. The doctor delivering the baby of Mary Blocker had never seen anything like it. Mary was a small woman. The labor was grueling. It was dangerous. But when the baby finally emerged, the room went silent. He weighed 14 pounds. It was a record. He was the largest baby ever born in Bowie County. They named him Bobby Dan Davis Blocker. From his very first breath, Dan was different. He didn't fit. By the time he was 12 years old, he was 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds. In the rough, scrap-knuckle world of 1930s Texas, being that big didn't make you popular. It made you a target. Local toughs from neighboring counties would drive into O'Donnell, Texas, just to find the big one. They wanted to fight him. They wanted to prove they could take down the giant. But Dan wasn't a fighter. He was a gentle soul trapped in a gladiator's body. His father, Ora Blocker, owned a small grocery store. Dan spent his childhood lifting 100-pound sacks of flour and grain as if they were pillows. His strength was functional. It was quiet. There's a famous story that Dirk Blocker tells, a story that defines his father's character. One day, a local bully kept pushing Dan. He poked him. He insulted him. He hit him. Dan didn't hit back. He didn't rage. He simply sighed, grabbed the bully by his belt and his collar, lifted him 7 feet into the air, and gently placed him on top of a high shelf in the store. He left him there, dangling and shouting, until the boy apologized. That was Dan. He controlled his power because he was terrified of what it could do if he unleashed it. But the world wouldn't let him stay gentle. He went to the Texas Military Institute. He played football at Sul Ross State University because, at his size, it was expected. He was a linebacker who terrified opposing teams. But while the other players were out drinking and celebrating, Dan was in the library. He was reading poetry. He was reading Shakespeare. He had the body of a tank, but the soul of a philosopher. He hid his intellect because, in Texas, big men were supposed to be dumb. But destiny has a way of finding you. In 1950, the Korean War broke out. The draft board took one look at Dan Blocker and stamped A1. But the U.S. Army had a logistical nightmare. They didn't have a uniform that fit him. They didn't have boots big enough for his size, 14 feet. He spent his first month of basic training marching in his civilian clothes and tennis shoes, while the quartermaster scrambled to custom-make gear for him. It was funny at the time, but where he was going, there was no laughter. Sergeant Dan Blocker was assigned to the 179th Infantry Regiment, 45th Division. He was sent to the front lines of North Korea, specifically to a place called Pork Chop Hill. It was a meat grinder, a frozen hell of trenches, mortar fire, and hand-to-hand combat. Dan spent 200 days on the line, 200 days of watching his friends die, 200 days of the smell of cordite and blood. Men who serve with him tell stories that sound like myths. They say that Dan was a guardian angel. Because of his immense size and strength, he could do things no other soldier could. When men were wounded in the crossfire, pinned down by machine guns, Dan would run out. He would scoop them up, sometimes two at a time, and carry them to safety on his massive shoulders. He was a human shield. He saved lives. He killed men to protect his unit. He was wounded in combat. He received the Purple Heart. But when he came home in 1952, he locked that part of his life in a steel box and threw away the key. He never bragged about it. He never used it for publicity. He was a pacifist because he knew exactly what violence looked like. This hidden trauma, the memories of Pork Chop Hill, was the first layer of the burden he carried. The smiling giant was also a scarred warrior. The golden cage of Bonanza. When Dan returned, he tried to live a normal life. He got his master's degree. He became a high school English and drama teacher in Texas. Can you imagine? A 300-pound war hero reading Romeo and Juliet to teenagers in a dusty Texas classroom. He loved it. He told his wife, Dolphia, that it was the only time he felt truly useful. But he had a growing family. He needed money. So he looked west. He looked to Hollywood. He started getting roles as the heavy, the bouncer, the goon, the villain who gets punched by the hero. Directors looked at his face and saw a monster. But one producer, David Dortort, looked at him and saw something else. He saw the kindness in his eyes. Dortort was casting a new show called Bonanza. He wanted a family that broke the mold. He wanted a father and 3 sons who represented different parts of America. He needed a gentle giant. He saw Dan in a small role and hired him without an audition. He said, "That's Haas." In 1959, Bonanza premiered. The critics hated it at first. They said Dan was too big, too sweaty, too unpolished. But the American public fell in love instantly. Haas Cartwright became the soul of the show. While Michael Landon was the pretty boy and Lorne Greene was the authority, Haas was the heart. He was the one who befriended the outcasts. He was the one who wouldn't hurt a fly unless he had to. He was the one who cried. He represented a safety that America desperately needed during the turbulent 1960s. Dan Blocker became a superstar. But this is where the trap snapped shut. Dan wasn't just playing a character. He was consumed by it. He couldn't walk down the street. He couldn't eat a meal in a restaurant without people coming up and slapping him on the back. "Hey, Haas," they would yell. "How's the Ponderosa?" He lost his name. He lost his privacy. He became a public property. And Dan Blocker was an intensely private man. He hated the celebrity machine. His son Dirk recalls the exhaustion. Shooting Bonanza wasn't easy. It was a factory. They filmed 34 episodes a year, 6 days a week, 14 hours a day. Dan was in almost every scene. He was riding horses, doing fights, memorizing lines, and he was doing it all while carrying 300 pounds. The physical toll was immense. His knees ached. His back screamed. But he never complained. He was a professional. He was a rock. He started a business empire on the side, the Bonanza steakhouse chain. It made him millions. But the money didn't buy him freedom. It just bought him a bigger cage. By the late 1960s, Dan was desperate to escape. He moved his family to Switzerland. Think about the lengths he went to. He moved his wife and 4 children to a house in the Swiss Alps, just so they could have a normal life away from Hollywood. He commuted. He would fly from Switzerland to Los Angeles to film, then fly back. The jet lag, the travel, the work, it was grinding him down. He told a reporter in 1971, "I am a product, like a box of soap flakes. I am being sold." Dirk reveals that by 1972, his father was making plans. Dan was 36 years old. His contract was coming up. He told his friends, "I'm done." He wanted to quit Bonanza. He wanted to do serious films. He had just been cast by Robert Altman to star in The Long Goodbye. It was going to be his breakout role as a serious actor. Or, he said, maybe he would just quit it all and go back to teaching. He saw the finish line. He saw the exit door. He was so close to freedom he could taste it. The mystery of the surgery. May 1st, 1972. Dan Blocker felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. He had been feeling run down for months. He blamed it on the schedule. He blamed it on the stress. But this pain was different. Doctors diagnosed him with gallstones. In the medical world, a cholecystectomy, gallbladder removal, is routine. It is one of the most common surgeries performed. It is supposed to be safe. Dan wasn't worried. He checked into the Daniel Freeman Hospital in Inglewood, California. He told his wife, Dolphia, "I'll be back in a few days. Don't worry about it." He told the producers, "I'll be ready for the season premiere." The surgery took place on the morning of May 13th. According to the medical records, the procedure went well. The gallstones were removed. Dan was wheeled into recovery. He woke up. He talked to the nurses. He made jokes. He was Haas. He was strong. But later that afternoon, something catastrophic happened inside his body. He began to struggle to breathe. He grasped his chest. The color drained from his face. A blood clot, a massive pulmonary embolism, had formed his leg and traveled to his lungs. It blocked the flow of oxygen. The doctors rushed in. They tried to resuscitate him, but his heart, as big and strong as it was, couldn't fight the blockage. At 36 years old, Dan Blocker was dead. The news hit the world like a physical blow. When the announcement was made, people thought it was a bad joke. Haas couldn't die. Haas was invincible. Mountains don't just fall down. The cast of Bonanza was destroyed. Lorne Greene took the call and dropped the phone. He said later, "It was like losing my own son." Michael Landon, who looked up to Dan as a big brother, was inconsolable. He locked himself in his trailer and wept. He later said that the heart of the show died on that operating table. But the real horror was at the Blocker home. Dirk was 14. His brother David was 13. His twin sisters were younger. They were waiting for their dad to come home. Instead, they got a phone call. Dirk describes a surreal feeling of the funeral. Because Dan was so famous, they couldn't just grieve. They had to grieve in front of the world. Thousands of fans lined the streets. The cameras were everywhere. Dirk stood by the grave, looking at the massive casket, feeling the eyes of the world on him. He realized then that his father didn't belong to him. He belonged to them, even in death. For years, conspiracy theories swirled. Did the doctors mess up? Did they give him too much anesthesia because of the size? Did they miss a warning sign? Why did a healthy 36-year-old man die from a routine procedure? The family never sued. They never spoke publicly about blame. They retreated into silence, just as Dan had always wanted. The son's confession. For 50 years, Dirk Blocker lived in the shadow of the giant. He became an actor, just like his dad, but he avoided westerns. He avoided roles that would invite comparison. But genetics are powerful. As Dirk aged, he started to look exactly like Dan. The walk, the smile, the voice. He was a living ghost. Now, at 66, Dirk has finally opened up about what he believes is the real truth behind his father's death. It wasn't just a blood clot. Dirk confesses what we all suspected. His father was simply worn out. He lived a lifetime in 36 years, Dirk said. He revealed that in those final years, Dan was running on empty. The war trauma, the grueling schedule, the weight of being Haas to millions of people. It had depleted his reserves. Dirk believes that his father's body was more fragile than anyone knew. He gave everything. Dirk said, he gave it to the army. He gave it to the show. He gave it to us. He kept nothing for himself. Dirk also revealed the contents of his father's private journals. In those pages, the simple cowboy Haas disappeared. Dan wrote about philosophy. He wrote about his hatred of racism and bigotry. He wrote about his fear that he wasn't doing enough to change the world. He wrote about his deep, overwhelming love for his children and his fear that Hollywood would ruin them. Dirk realized that his father stayed on Bonanza not for the fame, but for the money, to build a wall of security around his family. He sacrificed his artistic freedom to buy their safety. This is a confession. Dan Blocker didn't die of a medical mistake. He died of sacrifice. He carried the weight of the world until his heart just couldn't pump anymore. And Dirk also confessed his own struggle. I didn't want to be him, Dirk admitted. I wanted to be me, but the world wouldn't let me. For years, he resented the shadow. But now, reading those journals, seeing the man behind the myth, he has found peace. He realized that being Dan Blocker's son isn't a burden. It is a gift. He looks in the mirror now, and he doesn't see a ghost. He sees his dad, and he smiles. The legacy of the empty saddle. After Dan died, Bonanza tried to go on. They filmed one more season. They brought in new characters. They tried to fill the void, but it was impossible. Without Haas, the chemistry was broken. The warmth was gone. The show was canceled a year later. It is the only time in television history where the death of one character killed the entire series. That is the measure of Dan Blocker. He was the glue. Today, 50 years later, Bonanza is still playing somewhere in the world. And there he is, big hat, big smile, big heart, riding across the Ponderosa, laughing with little Joe, fixing the world with his bare hands. He is alive on the screen. But the real Dan Blocker is resting in a cemetery in DeKalb, Texas. His grave marker is simple. It doesn't list his awards. It doesn't list his box office numbers. It lists his service. It lists his family. His story is a reminder to all of us. We look at celebrities and we see the glamour. We see the money. We don't see the exhaustion. We don't see the sacrifices they make to keep the lights on. Dan Blocker gave his life to entertain us. And maybe, just maybe, he knew his time was short. Maybe that's why he lived with such intensity. Maybe that's why he loved so hard. Dirk Blocker has finally closed the circle. By speaking out, by sharing the truth about his father's humanity, he has given Dan Blocker his voice back. He reminded us that Haas was a character, but Dan was a man, a good man, a tired man, a man who loved his family enough to die for them. What do you think? Do you believe the stress of fame contributed to his early death? And is Bonanza the greatest TV Western of all time? Let us know in the comments below. Rest in peace, Dan. The Ponderosa is empty without you, but your memory fills the world. This is the Seventh Lens. Thank you for watching.